Hello there, gamers, and welcome to another edition of RNG, Random News of Gaming. Hope you had a nice gamer month full of intense gaming and gay old times.
Why are you gay?
Alright, we've got quite a bit to go over today because you know how June is. Showcases out the ass. Aside from that, there was not a whole lot of other things to talk about, so some of the news may be less interesting or important than usual. So, let's get that out of the way so we can get to the showcase roundup and the longest game release list I've ever made. We gamers are truly spoiled these days, you'll see. But if you want another way to keep track of all the games I cover on this channel, feel free to follow my Steam curator. Should be useful, especially after this month and all the showcases I had to pull games from that most people didn't watch. But I did. Just for you. Aren't I a dear? Anyway, probably going to be the last time I show this at the beginning, so let's get into the news. Starting with kind of a doozy of a story because it has to do with a certain event that YouTube doesn't like us talking about. If you remember what happened in Uvalde a couple of years ago, apparently the victim's parents are suing a lot of people that, at a glance, have literally nothing to do with this issue whatsoever, including Activision, with their justification being games like Call of Duty desensitizing people to violence.
Oh shit, here we go again.
I don't know about you, but these lawsuits sound like they should be dismissed immediately. We've seen things like this happen in the past, and I hope courts never rule against the video game companies, even ones like Activision, just because of the terrible precedent it would set. Team Fortress 2 has been in the news lately, shockingly, and it's not good. The game is really old at this point and is still supported to this day, nearly 17 years later, and it's infested with bots and cheaters, like every online FPS tends to have, but to a degree that's ruining the game for pretty much every person that plays. And it's culminated in a petition of over 140,000 people demanding Valve finally do something about it. Some players have tried to take matters into their own hands to get this bot farm exposed, which resulted in them getting doxxed, swatted, hacked, and all manner of other nefarious things, including spreading CP around.
Go ahead and take a seat.
Valve has to do something about it at this point, but until they do, the game will continue to get shafted with that overwhelmingly negative review score. Damn. Seems they are doing something about it now, maybe? But it's not over. Moving on from one dumpster fire to another dumpster fire, how about a Gamergate 2 update? Over the past 2 months or so, a YouTuber by the name of SmashJT has been attempting to catalog a list of people and organizations that have worked with Kotaku, so that we can have all of it in one place in case there are people who don't want to work with them or something. Basically, the goal was to make Kotaku toxic to work with, so that all these hacks can finally fade away into obscurity, which would definitely be a benefit to us all, to be honest. But just pointing out all the people who have worked with Kotaku is an immensely evil act. A grave offense that has no punishment severe enough. So the journalists made their attempts to get his site taken down, contacted his family, and one infamous SBI member allegedly contacted his employer to try and get him fired. Such stunning and brave tolerant behavior out of these people. In addition, it turns out SBI allegedly tried to get into the development of the upcoming Black Myth Wukong. Now, I have to stand up for the Chinese companies too, because these evil consultants basically use extortion tactics, asking for an exorbitant amount of money, then getting journalist goons to slander the company when they're told to get lost. Except it turns out this entire viral story may be completely untrue. The original source of this whole story is just an influencer on Chinese social media, not exactly what I'd call credible, and doesn't have any sources for their own claims. There's been a lot of anti-sweet baby rhetoric flying around that may be untrue, so we have to take everything with a grain of salt now. The reason people believe this story so readily is because this kind of extortion sounded exactly like something out of their own playbook, from their own words. But still, you gotta be more vigilant about things these days. Like some higher-ups at Squeenix, who are now being skeptical about these consultant companies apparently. But we'll see how that plays out. In case you missed it, Capcom put out a survey to a lot of their gamers, and the results were interesting to say the least. A lot of people really seem to be coping for a new Dino Crisis game, and that was probably the biggest takeaway for most people, and this probably happened due to the rumors floating around that they were bringing it back. Sorry, Mega Man fans. But the other interesting little factoid about these results was how wrong a lot of the mainstream industry's narratives about gamers are. Like the misleading numbers they like to throw around that there are more female gamers than male now. It's always been bullshit. These results are far more accurate to reality, and not only that, male and female gamers, surprise surprise, like different things. The difference here is pretty stark, and guess what? That's okay. It is what it is. But it should be very clear who your target audience is when you make games, especially you Western devs, Activision, Blizzard. Even a company like them who panders really hard to a very small minority of people these days came back with the same results, at least according to this leak here. I haven't seen this posted anywhere official, so, you know, grain of salt and all that. On to some quick hits. Earlier this year, Pieces Interactive made a full remake of Alone in the Dark, but it didn't sell or perform all that well, unfortunately. So Embracer shut down the studio. Bummer. They were also known for working on the Magicka series, Titan Quest expansions, and a few other things. Life by You, an upcoming Sims clone thing, has been cancelled. After a bunch of delays, I guess Paradox couldn't get the devs to whip it into shape or something. Well, Paradox is the publisher behind the shitty launch of Cities Skylines 2, so maybe they are the problem. Who knows? War Thunder is in the news yet again, but this time it's a bit different. They got a lot of flack for, poor choice of photoshopping for one of their promos. As you can see here, that's the Challenger rocket explosion from 1986. I can't help but think this was a publicity stunt, since the game already had an infamous reputation, but hey, might as well lean into it at this point, I guess. Elden Ring's DLC, Shadow of the Erdtree, came out, and like clockwork, it broke the collective smooth brain of the internet. Tons of people complaining it's too hard, and journalists having the worst takes on the situation yet again. The Steam reviews were in the mixed range, partially due to people complaining about the difficulty, but also that the game had performance issues on PC. Again. But it still sold like 5 million copies, which is kind of insane for a piece of DLC. It also became the highest rated DLC in history on Metacritic, but that's based on critics' reviews, so it doesn't mean anything. Speaking of which, on to the worst take of the month. I'm gonna be real, the worst take I saw was from Harmon Smith again.
It's over.
But I'd rather not beat a dead horse, so each individual will only be featured once a year max. Instead we have... oh no. I knew this day would come eventually. It's Kotaku. Alright, let's keep this short. Basically, this is supposed to be a review of Elden Ring's DLC, but you see who it's written by. Alyssa Mercante, tourist, activist, clickbaiter extraordinaire. Instead of just doing a straight-up review, the first 2 paragraphs are about how she twists this DLC into something relatable for the quote-unquote harassment campaign she's had to deal with, which, you know, she kind of facilitated and even encouraged with her own ridiculous behavior the past few months.
Come fight me. Physically, bitch.
And that's pretty much all that you need to know. The rest of the review is all info you can get from a more credible source elsewhere. This kind of nonsense is why Kotaku is a pox on the video game industry, and I have no problems with any efforts to put them out of business. But now, time for last month in localization. Really, there isn't a whole lot to go over, to be honest. Just a quick update on Eiyuden Chronicle 100 Heroes. They released a patch that addresses a lot of the game's issues, including its localization. I don't know the extent of the changes, but it's there. Baten Kaitos 1 and 2 HD Remaster suddenly shadow dropped on PC. And no, people haven't forgotten.
Yikes.
Kind of an old story and not very significant, so you can look it up yourself. I've also heard rumblings of somebody doing a retranslation of Paper Mario The Thousand Year Door, because apparently the English version is worse than I thought. I'll keep you posted on any updates on that front, but yeah, that's all I got for this month. Don't worry though. The next Trails game comes out in the West next month, so prepare for that.
Try to relax your anus.
Now that we got the boring news out of the way, let's go over the real meat of the show. The showcases. There were a lot of them, and I want to say, having to watch all of them for the sake of this series puts some things into perspective for sure, and I'll get into that in a bit. It also tested my sanity because, my god. Anyway, let's kick things off on June 4th. Before the Not E3 Summer Game Fest kicked off, there were a few other showcases to go over. The month started off very strong, as the Best Indie Games showcase was almost 3 hours long with little to no filler, just game after game after game. It was made in the best way possible to show off a lot of niche and indie games that may not have had the opportunity to get the exposure they need, and unfortunately, not a lot of people know about this one. I highly recommend giving this one a watch if you're in a gaming slump or something, as there was something for just about anyone in there. The next was the OTK Games Expo, a different style of showcase hosted by several streamers including Asmongold, Svand, and others. It was kinda cringe. Had some amusing moments, but otherwise was just okay. There was a lot of what appeared to be hands-on gameplay that the streamers got to partake in, but it felt kinda scripted, and there were a lot of ads and stuff in between. On the 6th, we had Homebrew Games, a showcase that's entirely made up of old-school style games that can run on old consoles. Unfortunately, some of the games shown pretty much look like complete rip-offs, and not a lot of them are releasing on Steam, so I probably won't be able to keep track of them really easily. If you're into this kind of stuff, I recommend watching the whole showcase yourself. It's not too long. Next we had the Guerrilla Collective, which was a solid showcase, but if you're like me and saw that Best Indie Game showcase beforehand, there were quite a few repeat showings. This is going to be a theme for this segment, just saying. Next we have the Accessibility Showcase on June 7th, which I'm definitely not the target audience for. You can make up your own mind on this one. Next was the supposed main event, the Summer Games Fest with Jeff Keighley. I thought it was kinda mid. There were a few interesting things there, but I just hate having my time wasted by these presenters and their circle jerks. Following that, we had Day of the Devs, which was pretty lame to be honest, with quite a few repeat showings again. Then there was the Devolver Digital Direct. These guys are the crackheads of the industry, I swear. Other than the amusement factor, there wasn't a lot here. On June 8th, we had the Future of Play showcase. This one was pretty lame to me, not gonna lie, and there were several repeats again. Then there was the Wholesome Games Direct, and as expected, once again, it was a boring show with a bunch of boring looking games. Your mileage may vary, I guess. Next was the Latin American Games Showcase, which is pretty self-explanatory, but this one also had some repeats, so I don't get why they needed to be in this showcase as well. Otherwise, it was decent. I've seen some pretty cool stuff come out of South America, so it's worth checking out. On the other hand, we have the Women-Led Games Showcase. I'm just gonna say it, this one is unnecessary. Not only were there tons of repeat games from other showcases, it shouldn't matter if the games are developed or managed or whatever by women. It's literally not a factor when deciding what to play. Oh well. Next we had the Future Games Show. Starting to sound redundant, huh? But this one was not bad. A few repeats again, but otherwise solid. Rounding out June 8th, we had the Indie FPS Showcase, which was actually very good with over 70 games. If you're a fan of shooters specifically, definitely give this one a look. Starting off June 9th, we had what might be the biggest surprise of the month, the Xbox Showcase. I thought this show was one of, if not the best presentations Xbox has ever put together, at least from what I remember. Which isn't saying a lot because I still have a lot of issues with it, such as the overuse of cinematics and lack of gameplay once again. And Fable. Go watch my previous top 10 video if you want to see what I mean. After that we had the PC Gaming Show, which was an utter cringe fest once again, but there were some good games in there. Not bad overall, but man, I lost brain cells listening to that dude on the set. Next we had Ubisoft Forward on June 10th. If you were expecting this show to not be a waste of time, you'd be mistaken. Almost everything shown here were games we already knew about. Definitely a contender for one of the worst shows of the month. Next was the Black Voices in Gaming and Dames for Games. Pretty much the same thing I said about the Women-Led Games Showcase applies, just replace gender with race for the first one. Followed by the Stream for a Cause show, which is literally straight up the progressive politics and gaming show. Don't waste your time. Most of these were repeat showings anyway. Then there was Yacht Club Games with their own showcase on June 14th. Nice to see them grow from an indie studio into a company that can have their own showcase, but it was mostly just Shovel Knight stuff. Only check it out if you really like Shovel Knight. Then we had a Nintendo Direct on June 18th. Absolutely solid showing there, can't really complain other than a few nitpicks. Then we had LRG3 2024 on June 20th, which is Limited Run Games showcase of all the things you shouldn't buy because Limited Run Games sucks, and always has sucked. But if you're desperate for some physical versions of games that are already out that probably wouldn't see the light of day otherwise, maybe there'll be something for you. Gotta give credit where credit's due. They are one of the biggest companies keeping physical media alive. Next, we had the Upload VR Summer Showcase on June 26th. Now, truth be told, I don't really cover VR games on this channel, the main reason being that I have never used a headset myself, so when I see these games I have no frame of reference to judge them on when deciding which ones to include in the release lists. If you are an avid VR user, I recommend checking out the show yourself and make yourself known in the comments section if you want me to pay more attention to these. Did this showcase sell me on having a VR headset? Almost. There's a few games I put on the list for releases, and one in particular that I was very interested in, but that's all for now. A lot of this showcase was dominated by MetaQuest exclusives, unfortunately, so I have no way of keeping track of those. Lastly, there was Gamescom Latin America. Don't bother watching. This is only notable if you were attending the show in person. For us, it was just repeats of stuff shown previously as far as I can tell, but by this point, I was so tired of these shows I just skimmed over everything and didn't watch the rest of it. Now, that's a lot of stuff, huh? Remember, I'll have a link to each of these showcases in the description if you want to see them for yourself. And I'll be keeping track of most of the games for my release list. If you want to know what I thought of some of the games shown off at these showcases, check out my previous video, the top 10 best and worst games from the June showcases. I had some fun with that one, so feel free to share it around and give it a like. But there's one more very important takeaway I had from all these game showcases that I want to put out there. We are truly spoiled as gamers, and I don't think people realize just how much we have. Even I admittedly tend to focus too much on the negatives of this industry when we actually have it really good. I added over 400 games to my Steam wishlist after going over all of these events. Most of them were for the sake of keeping track of releases for this series, but still. And you might say, oh, quality over quantity, and sure, I agree. But somewhere in that 400 games could be a potential favorite game of all time, as there are plenty of non-AAA developers with the same love and dedication to this medium as the greats. And I do hope that some of you watching this will be able to find something you love as a result of the release segment in these videos. Now, let's get into them. Like I said in the last one, June was kinda dry, which is probably good because nobody is paying attention to indie games while all the not E3 stuff is going on. Still, there were a decent amount of games that I missed once again, and some of them didn't get a release date until recently, so before we get into it, I want to run this by you guys watching. I'm thinking of changing this segment just a little bit. Instead of going over all the games coming out in the next month, I think it would be better to only bring up games that are already out, that it came out within the last month or 2 months. And I have several reasons for this. 1. Pre-ordering is bad, and showcasing games that aren't out yet encourages it. 2. Delays. The most frequent problem I run into is that a lot of these games get last-minute delays and don't actually launch until much later. Sometimes a month or 2, sometimes up to a year. It's getting annoying, and I don't want to get people's false hopes up too soon. 3. In my research of some of these lesser-known games, some of them are being deceptive before launch. I don't like to promote early access games, but I do promote games that come out of early access because that's their actual complete launch. Some devs like to hide the fact that their game is launching in early access and don't put it on the main Steam page until right before or at launch. There have been several games that I showed in this series that ended up being early access launches when their date came around. 4. If I change the segment this way, I will likely miss a lot less games than before and can weed out the games that end up being shovelware crap or launch in a broken state. And 5. It's a lot less work for me, which means I should be able to get these videos done sooner and not be late. Let me know in the comments what you think of this change. I will proceed as usual this time, featuring games that I missed in June and what I have upcoming in July, and holy shit, there are a lot this time. Starting with Splodey on June 4th, a unique little precision platformer without a jump button where you instead propel yourself with exploding potions. Don't try this at home. On June 5th, ZpellCatz came out, a very basic but pretty fun looking dungeon crawler hack and slash sort of thing where you play as magical cats. On June 7th, Empires of the Undergrowth came out of early access, a game where you play as Ant God and build the ants' nests and lead them to war in this unique real-time strategy game. Also on June 7th, we got Star Stuff, a casual puzzle game based on programming and fixing a giant star factory. On June 10th, Ghostware Arena of the Dead came out of early access, a boomer shooter-inspired FPS with Metroidvania elements apparently. Amazing. Some big titty ghosts you got there too. On June 18th, Chocolate Factory came out, a game where you make a giant candy factory so we can fulfill our fat girl dreams. Also has some exploration and combat somehow, and also some mixed reviews, so keep that in mind. Also on June 18th, Metal Slug Attack Reloaded Shadow dropped out of nowhere after it was shown at one of these showcases. Nice. Basically a tower defense game using the Metal Slug setting. On June 19th, Echo Generation Midnight Edition came out, an early 1990s style adventure RPG with turn-based combat. Now you millennial Earthbound kids can relive your childhood again for the 27th time. Also on June 19th, Mushoku Tensei Jobless Reincarnation Quest of Memories came out. Probably average dungeon crawler that you should only play if you're a fan of the anime. Also on June 19th, Republic of Pirates came out, a city builder strategy game in a similar vein to the Anno series, but with a piratey theme. On June 20th, Everafter Falls came out. Get another one of these farming simulators for all you filthy casuals out there. Just kidding. It has combat and exploration elements too, kind of like a simple cartoony Rune Factory. Also on June 20th, Workers and Resources Soviet Republic came out of early access. A city builder for all you tankies out there where you can fantasize about ruining the lives of your people and creating your own commie dystopia. Or something. On the other hand, you can play Dystopika from June 21st, a casual city builder where you run your own dystopian cyberpunk city and just make it look cool while you vibe to some synthwave, I guess. Also on June 21st, we got Heaven Seeker, the Savior of This Cruel World, a long-titled twin-stick bullet hell roguelike game, with waifus. Always a bonus. Also on June 21st, Noreia, the Gold Project came out. It's a Metroidvania, and it looks nice. To my ever-growing list it goes. On June 25th, we got Frogun Encore, a sequel to the first Frogun, a couple of 3D platformer action games heavily inspired by the PS1 and N64 era. All of you people coping for Microsoft to bring back Banjo should turn your attention to games like this, just saying. Lastly, on June 25th was the remake of the timeless classic PC game Riven, made by a studio that also did a remake of Myst that was very well received. Just looking at it, this looks like an example of how you do a proper remake. They even added VR support. Moving on to July, here we go. First Descendant on July 2nd, a free-to-play looter shooter with co-op and stuff with some DRM and probably some microtransactions and shit. But if you're into these kind of games, you know, the type you actually need friends for, maybe try this instead of one of the shittier AAA ones. Or if you and your friends are more into horror, you can try Once Human on July 9th, a co-op survival shooter where you can build and defend your territory and get scared shitless venturing into the unknown, together. On July 11th, we have Angerfoot, a fast-as-fuck first-person shooter where you run and gun and kick your way to victory like a psychopath. On July 12th, Fitness Boxing featuring Hatsune Miku comes out. For all my fellow fatties out there, now you have an excuse to get in shape with your favorite waifu. This one is only available on Switch so far, so get it on PlayAsia if you want it. Also on July 12th, Kaku Ancient Seal comes out of early access, and they apparently removed Zenuo from the game at some point during the early access period. Nice. This is an open world action RPG with some platforming and puzzle solving. Also on July 12th, we have The Last Alchemist, another one of those crafting simulation games where you are an alchemist. Imagine that. On July 15th, Fallen Leaf comes out, a retro-style 2D platformer that looks very inspired by Mega Man. Here we are once again, Capcom. Are you gonna take the hint yet? Also on July 15th, we have Legends of Dionysos, an old-school style 2.5D action RPG with what looks like some extensive character customization and min-maxing mechanics. On July 16th, we have 7 games. Oh boy. Starting with Cataclysmo, a base-building sandbox tower defense strategy game that sounds really addicting. Really addicting. Next, we have Evil v Evil, a game where you can gather your goth friends to play as vampires against hordes of other evil beings in this co-op PvE shooter. Next, we have Flock, a casual creature collecting adventure game where you fly around a sandbox world and just chill out with your army of world-conquering floofs, or something. Next, we have Hot Lap Racing. Basically, the title is all you need to see. It's a racing game. Better this one than supporting those other always online racing games that become unplayable, just saying. Next we have Magical Delicacy, a casual 2D game where you make tasty magical food for the people in town. I only use the highest quality of sus ingredients. Next we have Mech Builder, pretty much what it says on the tin. Make a mech, customize a mech, and that's it. Like a virtual model kit builder, I guess. Last one for the 16th, we have Yaoling Mythical Journey, a strategy RPG with creature collecting. Maybe a good alternative during this Pokemon dry season, I guess. On July 17th, we have Bow Path of the Teal Lotus, another good-looking Metroidvania to add to my ever-expanding list. Also on July 17th, we have Nobody Wants to Die, a futuristic detective game set in 2329 New York. Uncover the acts of a serial killer targeting the elite, or maybe something else? We got 5 games on July 18th, starting with Brazen Blaze, a 3 vs 3 combat game exclusively for VR, the first fully VR game featured on this series, I think, and one of the games I learned about from that Upload VR showcase. Next we have Dungeons of Hinterberg, an action-adventure fantasy RPG with a more hipstery art style. Zelda at home? Next we have Kunitsugami Path of the Goddess, Capcom's new hack and slash with strategy elements IP that they've been teasing quite a lot and looks pretty promising. Just be aware that it has de nouveau. Next we have Meifumado, an old school style 2D action combat game for all the boomer weebs out there. Last one on July 18th, Shim, a casual puzzle game thing where you hop from shadow to shadow. Now we got 4 games on the 23rd, starting with, Ete? However the fuck you say that. Another casual game where you explore and solve puzzles in watercolor style. Next we have Exophobia, a sci-fi boomer shooter with a super retro pixel art style. Next we have Ninja Slayer Neo Saitama in Flames, an over-the-top 2D action game based off the Ninja Slayer manga. Last we have Weirdlets, a creature collecting game where you play the game outside the game window while you do other things on your PC. How about that? On July 24th, Dreamsweeper comes out, a cute little dungeon crawling roguelite with Minesweeper style mechanics. 4 more games on July 25th, starting with Arranger, a role puzzling adventure, an adventure game where you solve puzzle dungeons and discover yourself or something. Next, Earth Defense Force 6 comes out, another entry in the crazy shark-jumping action series where you fight aliens and alien bugs trying to take over Earth. And you can play it with your friends. Next we have House of Golf 2 on July 25th, a mini golf game with some wild home-style courses. Now you can play the mini golf you've always wanted without pissing off your parents. Last, Kingdom Rush V Alliance, a strategy tower defense game with a very colorful cartoony style. On July 26th, Waco the Mask Gatherer, a 3D action-adventure game where you collect powerful masks and become more powerful. And I guess this is a Souls-like somehow. Lastly, and possibly least, we have Sword of Convallaria, a strategy game in the vein of Final Fantasy Tactics or Fire Emblem. The catch? It's a free-to-play, so it might be pay to win. And there you have it, the longest list of games to date by far. Now, starting next month, I will probably only cover games that are already out because I had a bunch listed that I had to take off the list due to delays and early access announcements and whatnot. So, just be aware of that when there is like a very small amount of games in the next one. Fortunately, this will cut down on the amount of time this segment takes to get done each month, so I can get these out sooner and not be late as often. But anyway, don't forget to check out my previous video, my top 10 best and worst games from all the June showcases, and if you want to see one of the showcases yourself, links will be in the description for all of them, even the shitty ones. Don't forget to leave a comment on what you think of any of these news stories, or let me know if there's any of these games that interest you. Also, don't forget to leave a like and share the video around if you know anyone who would like this kind of content, or leave a dislike if you are still defending Kotaku in 2024. Follow me on the X-Twitter if you want to watch me post the best quality of nothing on the internet. Join my Discord server if you want to dig up dirt to expose me, or just call me gay. Also catch my content on Rumble or Odyssey. And as always with this exposed bum of an industry, have high standards, low expectations.